Hello everyone, my name is Tony Prower and this is an extract from my landscape photography talk. This was at the Adobe Center in San Jose for the San Jose Photoshop user meetup group. Unfortunately the audio was lost, so this is just a voiceover version reduced to around 20 minutes. In this version I'm going to go over the iSpeech method in Photoshop. The intention of the iSpeech method is to enhance contrast in colors in a landscape photography image. This is on the ice beach. This is near Yokosuka, the black sand beach. Glacial ice that's been washed out from the glacier. And of course we've got these beautiful blue colors that contrast against the black sand. And it's sculptured by the sea, so there's nothing human about them at all. They really are unique. And of course this piece of ice is now long gone, melted into the North Atlantic many months ago. It doesn't necessarily make it art, but I suppose the pieces of ice are art. I'm going to attempt to go through some Lightroom techniques here. I'm very light in Lightroom. For me it's just balancing luminosity and a bit of a tidy up really. The first thing I'll show you just behind the scenes. This is actually done, but I'll go through the processes. So the first thing is to straighten the horizon because it's wonky. It's unfortunate because I've lost even more of the bottom here. It's not really a great example of composition, but hopefully we'll get something out of it. I've given it a 16:9 crop as well. I'm a huge fan of the 16:9 ratio. And in this case I think it draws the attention to the ice much sooner. You're on the ice and it's much more intimate. I'm lucky to have these areas just inside. Add a bit of texture. And there's my crop and rotate. What else have I done? I did a bunch of graduated filters. Just on lighten, very, very slight. Enhancement of exposure. I like to do that in the corners. This corner over there, and then a general one down over the sky. And a little bit more exposure, just to lift that a little bit. I'm fighting against the magic cloth here. Sometimes you have the opportunity again, but you've come down too fast with the magic cloth. But I don't mind that because with the sky I'm not looking for fantastic definition. It's something that's not supposed to be fantastic contrast. So I'm quite happy if it is a little dark sky and needs a bit of a brighten. Not too much in this case. I've gone and decided to drag one up from the bottom as well. A graduated filter just to lift the bottom up. And if I show you without the graduated filters, you get a sense of what I'm trying to achieve in terms of balancing the luminosity. I'll see if I can switch the filters on and off. So you get the idea, I'm just lifting the shadow areas, I guess. Now I think that's nearly everything I would do. Just one thing, I'll often do that, I'll often balance the picture in black and white, which I think is a really helpful thing to try. Because you could be distracted by color, and really what you're trying to do is balance the luminosity. It's a neat trick to switch to black and white while you're doing this. Okay, then what I'll do is I'll get in and inspect the detail. I'll probably have to do this first actually. Got to get in there, see if it's a usable shot. And if it's soft and out of focus, then it might be okay for Facebook. But it's not something you're going to print. With this, I've adjusted for the chromatic aberration. A little, just to take a little red edge off the top of the trunk there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is export this as a TIFF file. This is my own preference. I just like to have the TIFF file because when it becomes a TIFF file, it becomes a photograph. I want to create the photograph to start with in Lightroom, export it with a 16-bit TIFF file. It just gives me the best quality to work with in Photoshop. So let's get Photoshop up and open it. So here we have the shot, and because in Lightroom I've basically worked on the shadow areas, boosted the shadows, and balanced the luminosity. I should have mentioned I tend to follow the histogram. What I've done is that I've pushed the left side of the histogram a little bit, just to clear the shadows so I've got the good information to work with. So what I've ended up with is a fairly low contrast file. That's the best starting point in Photoshop. I have to use Photoshop. Lightroom doesn't have the power for me. The reason is because I think it's about contrast. And in Photoshop, because it's a pixel editor and not a whole picture editor, you've got total control of contrast. And I think the key is local contrast. Has anybody heard of Tony Kuiper and luminosity masks? It's a very powerful technique. I was kind of doing the same thing when I heard about it. So I've stolen a bit of his moves to work with mine. So here we got, this is what I call the Ice Beach method. Like all good Photoshop methods, I start by duplicating the layer. My next trick is to pick a screen blending mode. Screen, it makes the picture brighter, and that lifted the shadows a little too much. So the next step is to make a selection. For this, I'm going to, if you look at the channel palette, you see the RGB, Control plus 2. What I'm going to do is Control plus Alt plus 2. That's going to make a luminosity selection. But I'm not going to stop there. I'm holding down the Shift key as well. So I've got Shift plus Control plus Alt on a PC. Maybe someone would like to say what it is on a Mac. And I press 2 again. I don't want any sky in this selection. I just want the dark areas at the bottom of the beach there. The idea is to boost the levels of the areas where I want to increase color and contrast. So now I create a mask to protect the original shadows. And I'll just flick it on and off so you can see how lifted those mid-tone areas are. Now I'm going to duplicate the layer again. This time it's going to be a soft light layer, a soft light blending mode. You can see how the contrast pops back in there. But I'm not going to leave it like that. What I want to do is make the selection again, and I want to move the selection down so it's covering all the middle ground. So I want the marching ants around these dark areas. Just at the bottom here, maybe up here as well. Yeah, I think I'll aim for that. Ants marching around here. So again, I'm Control plus Alt. I have to go to the Channels palette for some reason. There you go, that's my first selection. The second selection. And it's the third selection that's given me the marching ants around that dark area that I wanted. Now it's important at this stage to ignore the highlights. I'm not interested in the highlights. I'm interested in the midtones. But I want the contrast in the midtones, but I don't want it to affect the shadows. I create a mask with that selection. The shadows are preserved. I have still got that. I don't know how well you can see it, but I've still got all that detail that I can play with. But I've got good contrast in the midtone. Terrible highlights. So now each time you create another one of these masks, you've got to put on Gaussian Blur. It ends up looking a bit strange, so I'm going to filter Gaussian Blur. This time I'll be fairly low, double figure number. It's just going to take the edge off the mask. So I want something around probably about 60 pixels if I can do that. Nearly there. Now I don't know if you can see the difference if I click the preview on and off. Do you see the difference? It brings back clarity. Now I create another layer and I'm going to work on the highlights. So I'll send this to the top and use a multiply blending mode. And here you see the highlights come back in with all the colour. I've got to create a mask because I can't leave it like this. This is far too dark. The multiply has affected too much of these dark areas. So against it I'm creating a luminosity mask. Now what I'm looking for the mask selection to be capturing the colours for the highlights. I want some of that sky, maybe a little more than that. Yeah, okay, let's try that. Create my mask. Now you can see how it's gone a bit weird. This is really needing a Gaussian blur, so filters, Gaussian blur. The last one was around 80. This time I want to double it. I want to double it each time. That's why I start with a low number. So yeah, this time I want to go up to 160, 150. Let's see if that brought back the clarity of the picture. Here we go. Click that on and off, you'll see. It's lovely. See fantastic detail preserved in the highlights there. Now I'm going to duplicate the layer again. I believe that I'm going to make a new layer. This has slightly less selection, I think. This time I'm just going to select these color highlights, the high highlights. See how it goes. Needs a bit more than that. It's getting there. Maybe one more. That could be too much. You could get more technical. You could start selecting the green, blue, or red channel. But here I'm just selecting luminosity for a quick demonstration. I create a mask out of that, and of course, what's the next step? Gaussian blur. There we go. I was at 160 that time, so I'll go for 300 or something. 320, see what happens. I don't have any control over this at all. 355, I'll settle with that. I'll preview again, just so you can see. I think you saw that already. Let's allow the edges, the black and white edges, to come back. The blur is spreading the mask effect over a larger area. And of course, the beauty of this is that if you're not completely satisfied with this, you can go through and adjust the layers and get it looking as real or as processed as you like. I'll adjust the multiplier layers for the highlights. I'll adjust the soft light layer for the mid-tone contrast. Adjusting the screen layer can give you brightness control of the areas you've been working on. I might even go a little darker to accentuate the black sand. I'll put this layer to the top so you can see the work I've done. That's quite nice. I'm going to flatten that. I don't do much more layer blending than that, but I'm going to do a few tricks to enhance the clarity. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to introduce more clarity with soft light blending mode. And then the high pass filter. This is a classic technique for sharpening, but I'll use it for clarity as well. If you put a high value in there, such as 160, so you can see you have control over the contrast areas. Really high gives a whole picture clarity, which can really help the flow of the image. I'm going to settle around 170. If I'm being really fussy, I might adjust the sharpness. I'll zoom in a bit. It might be worthwhile using the same technique with a low number to sharpen. So again, I'm going for the soft light blending mode. Again, high pass. This time around 4. The problem with using this technique is that you can't really preview. You're just turning the filter on and off without seeing the effect of the sharpen. But what you can do is create the layer, then you can turn the layer on and off. Can you see how that is sharpened a little? You can see how the larger high pass has helped with the contrast and clarity. I'll flatten the layer. And there you have the ice piece method. I'll save that again as a large TIFF file. So this ice beach method uses luminosity masks and blending modes to enhance contrast and colour. I use a technique to process nearly all my magic cloth landscape images. So for more information you can go to icelandaurora.com. I've got information in my tutorials about this method, other methods, and the magic cloth technique. If you go to Photo Tours, you can see what's available in Iceland. We offer tours for everybody all through the year, and if you use these following coupon codes, you can get discounts. We get 5% day tours on Northern Lights and 10% on multi-day tours. Also, you find more information on our California Iceland photo meter. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in Iceland one day.